Welcome to Module 14, the final module. You've now learned the entire TOGAF framework, from the ADM to governance to the reference models. This last lesson does two jobs. First, it shows how TOGAF is applied in the real world iteratively, adaptably, and alongside other frameworks. And second, it consolidates everything into a focused revision and gives you a concrete exam day playbook. Treat this module as active revision, not passive watching. Quiz yourself as we go. Let's finish strong and get you ready to pass. Here's the plan for this capstone. You'll learn how the ADM is applied iteratively, through its 4 iteration cycles. You'll see how the ADM is adapted for different architecture styles, and how TOGAF integrates with other frameworks. Then we'll revise the whole syllabus with a structured recap: the wheel, the outputs, the vocabulary, the big lists, and the top facts. And finally, you'll get a complete exam day strategy. This is your consolidation module, so the most important thing you can do is revise actively, pause, recall, and test yourself rather than just letting it wash over you. Let's start with how TOGAF is actually applied, beginning with iteration. By now you know the refrain: the ADM is not a one-pass waterfall. It's applied iteratively. That iteration can happen at 3 scales: around the whole cycle, between phases, and within a single phase. And every iteration adds new, refined assets to the architecture repository, so the organization's body of architecture work grows over time. So the foundational application principle is that the ADM is run repeatedly and adaptively, not once and done. Iteration isn't an exception to the method, it's the normal way the method is used. TOGAF describes 4 named iteration cycles, and they map neatly onto groups of phases. The architecture capability iteration, centered on the preliminary phase in Phase A, establishes and evolves your EA capability. The architecture development iteration, covering phases B, C, and D, develops the actual architectures. The transition planning iteration, covering phases E and F, plans the migration. And the architecture governance iteration, covering phases G and H, governs the change and its realization. So 4 iteration cycles: capability, development, transition planning, and governance. Notice how they partition the ADM into 4 meaningful chunks, a useful way to think about which phases naturally belong together. The ADM is explicitly designed to be adapted to different architecture styles. The standard and its series guides give guidance for several: Agile enterprises and Agile delivery, security architecture, service-oriented architecture, or SOA, and digital, including digital transformation. The detailed how-to for each lies in the TOGAF Series Guides. The exam-relevant point is simply that the ADM supports many styles, it is not locked to one rigid way of working. So if you see a question implying TOGAF only works for traditional, waterfall-style architecture, that's false. Flexibility across styles is a deliberate design feature, consistent with everything we've learned about tailoring. TOGAF doesn't exist in isolation, it's designed to work alongside other frameworks, and the exam likes you to know this. Zachman provides a classification ontology, where TOGAF complements it with a content classification scheme. ITIL handles IT service management, operating the architecture once it's delivered. Prince2 and PMBOK handle project management, which is how you run each ADM cycle as a project. COBIT handles IT governance, integrating with TOGAF's governance. And ArchiMate provides a modeling notation for expressing TOGAF's models. The unifying idea is that TOGAF is complementary, it integrates with these frameworks rather than replacing them. Watch for answers claiming TOGAF must replace ITIL or COBIT, that's wrong. Here's an elegant idea worth knowing. The preliminary phase, as we've seen, establishes your architecture capability, the team, the principles, the governance, and the tools. But TOGAF goes further and suggests something rather recursive: you can run the ADM itself to build that capability, treating your enterprise architecture practice as the enterprise being architected. And the capability is then improved over successive capability iterations. So a neat fact for the exam: you can use the ADM to establish the EA capability. The method that develops architectures can also be turned inward to develop the architecture function itself. It's TOGAF applied to TOGAF. Let's reinforce the single most recurring theme of this entire course: tailoring. TOGAF is a foundational framework, and it is expected to be tailored. You tailor the framework, the ADM, the deliverables, and even the terminology. The pattern, stated again and again, is adopt some parts, customize some, exclude some, and create others to fit your context. So here's a reliable exam heuristic that served you throughout. If an answer option says to use TOGAF exactly as written, with no adaptation, it is almost certainly wrong. Tailoring isn't a footnote in TOGAF, it's core to the entire philosophy. Carry that instinct into the exam. Now we shift into pure revision, starting with the most important picture in the whole framework, the ADM wheel. Take a moment and try to draw it from memory right now. Preliminary phase, then A through H arranged in a circle, with requirements management at the center connecting to every phase. In one-word reminders: P prepare, A vision, B business, C data and application, D technology, E solutions, F migration, G govern the build, H manage change. If you can reproduce this wheel from memory, with each phase in order, you have covered the single largest part of the exam. Practice drawing it until it's effortless. It's the backbone of everything. Next, revise the phase outputs, because which phase produces this is the most common question style on the entire exam. Phase A produces the statement of architecture work and the architecture vision. Phases B, C, and D produce the architecture definition document, the requirements specification, and the gaps. Phase E produces the first architecture roadmap and the transition architectures. Phase F produces the detailed implementation and migration plan. Phase G produces the signed architecture contract and compliance assessments. And Phase H produces change requests and, when needed, a request for architecture work to start a new cycle. Drill this table. Knowing which phase produces which output is worth a substantial slice of marks. Let's revise the core vocabulary pairs that thread through every topic. A deliverable is signed off, an artifact is a catalog, matrix, or diagram, a building block is reusable. An ABB is the what, and an SBB is the with what. Baseline is the as is, target is the to be, and a transition is an intermediate state. And a view is what you see, while a viewpoint is the template that defines it. These pairs don't stay in their home modules, they reappear across the whole framework and across the whole exam. So, overlearn them. When you can rattle off both halves of each pair instantly, a huge number of questions become straightforward. Now the counts, because many questions simply ask how many. There are 4 architecture domains, captured by BDAT. There are 9 ADM activities, preliminary plus A through H. There are 4 scoping dimensions, breadth, depth, time, and domains. There are 4 continuum stages, foundation, common systems, industry, organization specific. There are 8 repository components. There are 3 landscape levels, strategic, segment, capability. There are 6 governance characteristics. There are 6 conformance levels. And there are 3 change types. Memorize these numbers as a sequence: 4, 9, 4, 4, 8, 3, 6, 6, 3. Knowing the counts cold turns how many questions into instant points. Acronyms are free marks, so let's drill them. ADM is the architecture development method. ABB and SBB are the architecture and solution building blocks. ADD is the architecture definition document. BDAT is business, data, application, technology. TRM and IIIRM are the technical and the integrated information infrastructure reference models. And RFAW and SOAW are the request for and statement of architecture work. For each one, recall the expansion and the concept it attaches to. These come up constantly, and there's no excuse to lose marks on them. A few minutes of flashcard drilling locks them in permanently. Treat acronym recall as guaranteed points you simply collect. Here are the 10 facts I'd most want you to know cold walking into the exam. 1. Phase C is data plus application. 2. Requirements management is the continuous center, and it manages but doesn't resolve. 3. The request for architecture work comes into Phase A, and the statement of architecture work goes out. 4. Phase E identifies, Phase F finalises. 5. ABB is the what, SBB is the with what. 6. A deliverable is signed off, an artifact is a catalog, matrix, or diagram. 7. Transition architectures first appear in phase E. 8. The architecture contract is signed in phase G. 9. There are 3 change types, and re-architecting means a new ADM cycle. 10. A view conforms to a viewpoint, and the viewpoint is the template. Know these 10, and you are in genuinely strong shape. Let's revise the confusions the exam deliberately exploits, because most wrong answers are built on exactly one of these. Deliverable versus artifact, a signed-off package versus a single aspect. ABB versus SBB, capability versus implementation. Phase E versus F, identify versus finalize. View versus viewpoint, the result versus the template. Compliant versus conformant, missing but not contradicting versus all features present. And partition versus level, ownership versus abstraction. When you read a tricky question, ask yourself which of these confusions it's testing. Spot the intended trap, and the distractor options reveal themselves. 6 confusions, and recognizing them is half the battle on the trickier questions. A quick deep dive revision on Phase A, since it's heavily tested. It's triggered by the request for architecture work, and it outputs the approved statement of architecture work. It produces the architecture vision, often drawn as a solution concept diagram. It uses business scenarios to discover requirements. And its risk assessment distinguishes initial risk, before mitigation, from residual risk, after mitigation. Above all, remember that Phase A is high-level and aspirational, the real detail comes later, in Phases B, C, and D. If a question describes detailed architecture work in Phase A, be suspicious. Phase A sets direction, it doesn't fill in the fine print. Now revise governance, one of the denser topics. There are 4 governance domains, and 6 characteristics: discipline, transparency, independence, accountability, responsibility, fairness, the string DTIRF. The architecture board governs, and the architecture contract enforces. There are 6 conformance levels, and the only one that contradicts the architecture is non-conformant. A dispensation is a governed, time-limited exception. And the point that catches people: governance is continuous, it's set up in the preliminary phase and applied throughout, not confined to Phase G. Run through those facts once more in your head. Governance questions reward this kind of precise recall. Let's revise the continuum and repository. The enterprise continuum has 2 halves: the architecture continuum, holding ABBs, and the solutions continuum, holding SBBs. Each runs through 4 stages: foundation, common systems, industry, and organization specific. The architecture repository has 8 components. And recall the reference model placements: the TRM is a foundation architecture, and the 3RM is a common systems architecture. Lean on your 2 memory hooks here: FCIO for the continuum stages, and SSC for the landscape levels, strategic, segment, capability. Those 2 little strings carry the 2 most tested lists in this whole area. Recall them now and they'll be ready on exam day. Let's switch to exam strategy, starting with a format reminder. The foundation exam is 40 multiple choice questions, 60 minutes, closed book. The pass mark is 60%, 24 out of 40, though you should always verify the current threshold on the official site before booking. Each question has a single best answer, and there's no negative marking. With 60 minutes for 40 questions, you have about 90 seconds each, which is comfortable as long as you don't get bogged down on the hard ones. Know the format cold so that nothing on exam day is a surprise. Surprises cost time and composure. Here's the core technique, the 2-pass approach. On your first pass, answer every question you find easy and flag the hard ones to revisit. Don't let a single tough question eat 5 minutes. On your second pass, come back to the flagged ones with the time you've banked. Never leave a blank, since there's no negative marking. A guess can only help you. And generally, trust your first instinct unless you find a clear, concrete reason to change it. The combination of 2 passes plus no blanks is the highest scoring strategy there is. It keeps you moving, protects your time, and ensures you capture every easy mark first. Reading the question well is a skill worth a few marks on its own. Always read the whole question and all 4 options before choosing, don't pounce on the first plausible answer. Identify which phase or which term the question is really testing, that's usually the key. Eliminate options that describe the right idea but attach it to the wrong phase, a very common distractor pattern. And distrust any option containing absolutes like always, never, or only, because TOGAF is tailorable. When 2 options look close, the one with the more precise, TOGAF-specific wording is usually correct. Careful reading turns ambiguous questions into answerable ones. Let me give the red flag words point its own moment, because it's that useful. Be wary of answer options containing always, never, must always, or the only way. These absolutes are usually wrong, because TOGAF is flexible and tailorable. Conversely, lean toward options using softer, more accurate language like may, typically, is recommended, or supports. This single habit, distrusting absolutes and favoring the measured phrasing, can rescue several borderline questions across the exam. It's the cheapest, highest return technique you have. When you're genuinely torn between 2 options, let the absolute one be your prime suspect. Let me give you a concrete plan for your final week. Days 1 and 2, redraw the ADM wheel and the phase outputs until they're completely automatic. Days 3 and 4, drill the big lists, the acronyms, and the top 10 facts using active recall. Day 5, rewatch the heavy modules, the ADM phases, the content framework, the continuum, and governance. Day 6, sit a full, timed mock exam, and then carefully review every single question you got wrong. And Day 7, do only light review, and crucially, rest before exam day. The through line is simple: active recall plus a timed mock will always beat endless passive rereading. Here's your exam day checklist. Confirm your logistics in advance, the time, whether it's at a center or online, and your ID. As soon as you start, dump the ADM wheel onto your scratchpad, while it's fresh and your nerves are highest. Use the 2-pass technique and leave no blanks. Keep an eye on the clock, budgeting around 90 seconds per question. And stay calm, you've prepared thoroughly, more thoroughly than most. That very first act, sketching the ADM wheel onto scratch paper before you read a single question, does something powerful. It steadies your nerves and gives you a reference to lean on throughout. What should you do when you genuinely don't know? First, eliminate the obviously wrong options. Even removing 1 or 2 dramatically improves your odds. Then ask the diagnostic question: which phase, or which term, is this really about? That often surfaces the answer. When still torn, prefer the more tailorable, less absolute option, per our red flag rule. And if it's still unclear, flag it and move on. Don't pour minutes into one stubborn question. Remember, a 50-50 guess after elimination is vastly better than a blank, because there's no penalty for being wrong. Make every question earn at least your best guess. Let's recap the whole journey you've taken. Modules 0 and 1 built the foundations of enterprise architecture and the TOGAF framework. Modules 2 through 7 walked the ADM, its 9 activities plus requirements management at the center. Modules 8 and 9 covered the continuum, the repository, and the content framework. Modules 10 through 12 covered partitioning and views, stakeholders, and governance. And Module 13 covered the reference models. That's the complete syllabus. If you're deciding where to spend your remaining revision time, spend it on the ADM, Modules 2 through 7. It's the spine of the framework and the largest share of the exam by a clear margin. Let's take stock of how far you've come. You can draw the ADM from memory. You can state the purpose and outputs of every phase. You can define all the core terms, deliverables and artifacts, ABBs and SBBs, views and viewpoints. You understand the continuum, the repository, governance, and the reference models. And you have a clear, concrete exam day strategy. That is genuinely everything the foundation exam asks of you. The confidence you want on exam day comes from active recall, so do yourself one favor, test yourself one more time on the top 10 facts and the ADM wheel, and then go ahead and book that exam. A final word of encouragement. Every year, thousands of people pass the TOGAF Foundation exam, many of them with far less structured preparation than you now have behind you. So trust your preparation. Manage your time with the 2-pass technique. distrust the absolutes, and keep the ADM wheel close. You've done the work, and the work pays off. Good luck, go and pass. And here's a tip, rewatch this final module the night before your exam. It's a calm, complete recap that will leave you walking in composed, focused, and ready. One last comprehensive self-check. From memory, can you draw the ADM and name each phase's output? Can you recite the top 10 most tested facts? Can you give the counts 4, 9, 4, 8, 3, 6, 6, 3? And can you state the exam format and pass mark, 40 questions, 60 minutes, 60%? If all 4 of those are solid, you are exam ready, full stop. If anyone wobbled, you now know exactly which slide to revisit. This is the most efficient possible final check for questions that between them touch every corner of the syllabus. Question 1. Which iteration cycle of applying the ADM is concerned with establishing and evolving the enterprise architecture capability? Pause to consider your answer. The correct answer is C, architecture capability iteration. The architecture capability iteration, centered on the preliminary phase in Phase A, establishes and evolves the EA capability. Development iterations cover B and D, transition planning covers E, F, and governance iterations cover GAH. Question 2. A change to the architecture is significant enough that it requires putting the whole architecture through the ADM again. What type of change is this? Pause to consider your answer. The correct answer is C, re-architecting change. A re-architecting change requires running the entire architecture through the ADM again. Simplification is handled by change management, incremental may need only partial re-architecting. Question 3. Which statement about using TOGAF with other frameworks is correct? Pause to consider your answer. The correct answer is B. TOGAF is complementary and can be integrated with frameworks such as Zachman, ITIL, Prince2, and COBIT. TOGAF is complementary to other frameworks and is designed to integrate with them. Zachman for classification, ITIL for service management, Prince2/PMBOK for project management, COBIT for governance, and ArchiMate for modeling. It does not replace or forbid them. Question 4. In Phase A, which document is the input that triggers the cycle, not the output? Pause to consider your answer. The correct answer is C. The request for architecture work. The request for architecture work is the input that triggers Phase A. The statement of architecture work is the output that is approved to authorize the cycle. Request in, statement out. Question 5. What is the pass mark for the TOGAF Foundation, Part 1, exam? Pause to consider your answer. The correct answer is C, 60%, 24 of 40. The TOGAF Foundation, Part 1, exam pass mark is 60%, 24 of 40 correct, in 60 minutes, closed book. Always confirm the current threshold on the official open group site before booking.